So welcome to everybody to the Math and Coding online session. And it's from 1 to 3 today. Just to quickly go through the agenda, we're going to start with some introductions. Then we're going to talk about math pedagogy. We're going to do some online learning. Then we're going to go to coding and math. So we're going to talk a bit about coding and then about how it relates to math and the advantages of coding with math. And then we're going to have our hands-on session. Just making sure I don't need to let anybody in. Okay, we're good. So we're going to start off with the introductions. We are from the STEAM 3D Maker Lab. Today, this session will be co-hosted by Laura Dobos, who is here. Hi, wave, Laura. And I'll ask her to introduce herself to everyone.
Oh, right now. Okay. My name is Laura. I have been with the lab for about 4 years now, I think. I'm working on my master's right now, focusing on girls in STEM. And I'm also a teacher. I'm teaching grade 9 and 10 online right now. So kind of busy, but I really enjoy doing all of the research and sharing all of the kind of knowledge that we've gained. Andrew, yes, girls in STEM throughout the years. So I'm excited to kind of share some of that with you today. Sorry, STEAM, but mine is STEM because STEAM isn't big enough right now. There's not enough research in STEAM.
Stream. I love that. And then, of course, we're lucky enough to have Dr. Jeanette Hughes here, who is our fearless leader. I always introduce her that way.
Hi, everyone.
You could say hello to everyone.
Yeah, welcome. I will be in and out of the meeting, but I'm really glad you signed up and that you're here, and you're in great hands with Laura and Margie. So I hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Jeanette. Jeanette is the Canada Research Chair, excuse me, and we all work with her at the STEAM 3D Lab. I'm also a teacher, just like Laura Dobos is. But I'm also getting my master's at Ontario Tech University, and I'm a research assistant with the STEAM 3D Lab. So a lot of our learnings here and what we're going to talk about are from our experience as research assistants, but also as teachers and working with many different educators across Ontario. And actually globally, I know several, Laura has been, and as well as Jeanette, internationally, actually. So to continue, and we also have Laura Morrison here. So Laura Morrison is joining us. You want to say hi? Oh, she's here. Okay.
Well, I'm not really presenting, but I'm just here to support. But hi, I work in the lab as well.
Thanks, Laura. So the other part for this presentation, we have partnered with the Math Knowledge Network. So that is with George here. You can see at the bottom, he is a professor of mathematics in education at Western University. As part of this session, you will receive some of his book, and that is the particular book that we're going to go. It's called Coding for Young Mathematicians. It is a fantastic book, so I think you'll be pretty happy with this. There's lots of lessons, activities, pedagogy, and pedagogical approaches to support learning. So that will come to you. I believe you should have received a form, and if there was any concerns with that form, you can just email us and we'll make sure that you get access to that book. And that is, of course, the material here is driving a lot of the content of the session, as well as the experiences that we have had. So that is introductions of who we are, but we are hoping that each of you can just provide us just a little bit of introductions on yourself. So we have a Padlet here. And I will just add the link to the Padlet for you to access. If you could go into this Padlet and if you could introduce yourself, your educational role, as well as if you could tell us what you hope to achieve from this session. So yeah. Oh, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that. So the links are there. And I'm going to go and open it up just to take a look just quickly. And I will go in there. And what we will do is, if you could just start with that introduction, basically what, how your educational role and perhaps your educational role as it relates to math, or math and coding or coding, and as well what you hope to get out of this session. And then what we'll do at the end of the session, we will come back and we will come back into the session or the Padlet, and we'll ask you to just give a summary or some feedback at the end, and whether there's any follow-up questions as well. So I can see people are starting to enter in here, and so we'll keep that going for now, and we'll come back to that at the end of the session. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the math pedagogy. So we're going to talk about 4 distinct pedagogical approaches here. And again, this comes from the material from the Math Knowledge Network, and particularly the approaches that they have used to the greatest success within elementary classes. They've done a lot of research and worked in various different schools. So the 4 concepts that they use quite often are the advanced organizer, the concept attainment, the concept formation, and inquiry training. And we're going to go through each of these quickly in the next couple slides. Essentially, some of these you might already be using, and we're just putting sort of the pedagogical name around it. But because as personally, I have used some of these quite often in my classes, and I at first had not known what the pedagogical name was. So to move on, we're going to talk about the first one, which is the advanced organizer. And we really sort of put a clue up in the top corner, which is, what do you know, or what do you remember? And this pedagogical approach was developed by David Ausubel. And really it's about making connections to various concepts by invoking that prior knowledge with students. So an example that we have, and I've done this myself, is with integers. So if you think about integers and starting the learning with integers at an elementary level, when the first time they're seeing negative numbers, it's sometimes great to touch upon things that they've already been aware of with negative numbers. So temperature, for example, is one I personally have always started with, because students will know, especially living in Canada, about negative numbers in temperature, right? Below 0, -1, -2. But you could also talk about chemical reactions. With ions, we know there can be negatively charged and positively charged. So you now can see the negative number there. For your sports or your athletes, a lot of times looking at their positive or negative record can help them understand a positive number, but also a negative number. And of course, anyone who loves golf will know under par. So these are just some examples of how you could sort of make the connections with students' previous knowledge. And once you have that, then you can start bringing in the idea of what is an integer, the negative number and the positive numbers, and relate that back to the natural numbers and the whole numbers. And then what I like to do is I like to sort of really show it within the number line. So this really gets into the teaching, and I connect this with your natural numbers, your whole numbers, etc. So this is just one way to sort of reach and an example actually from the Math Knowledge Network, where they have used some of these previous information connections that students had to temperature, for example. And to get this information, you can connect it to the temperature, but that may not always reach students. So I think one of the important things to remember here is to get to know your students. What are some of the activities and interests they have? That way you can find out how to connect it to previous knowledge. And I think important features here are diagnostics assessments. So that's reaching out and understanding some of their previous knowledge and also some of their misconceptions. Now, I have some basic here examples. I'm wondering, and I'd like to reach out to you, any examples from the group that you may have of an advanced organizer. So something where you've either touched upon a previous knowledge, or if you've used a diagnostic successfully. If you could talk a little bit about any examples, if anyone wants to share, you can put it in the chat. I'm just going to switch just in case someone's trying to get into the meeting. Sorry. There we go. So one I particularly like to just mention is I've used it with my own son. Is he plays hockey, and this, the reality is that even if you're playing house league or even having fun, the kids always remember who scored and what the scores are, who's the top scorers, etc. So being able to delve into understanding those hockey statistics is a nice feature there to start understanding data management and applying some of the knowledge that you learned. So I'm going to move on to the next concept. I'm guessing many of you might be familiar with the advanced organizer. I feel like diagnostics are something that a lot of us have used before. So I'm going to move on to the next concept, which is, or the next pedagogical approach, which is concept attainment. And this is really about understanding. And here, the approach was, the pedagogical approach was developed by Jerome Bruner. And in this case, it's really structured around helping students learn those key attributes of concepts. And they do this by doing a comparison. It's comparison between the elements that belong within the attributes, or that have those attributes, and the elements that do not. So I think the best thing is to show you an example. So George has used this example to the right, which he calls the pattern. And it's understanding the pattern of data. So going back to the integers example, you could ask, what's the pattern here? And you have a column of yes and a column of no. And then at the bottom, you would have your data set. And I'll move this over so people can see. But as you can see here, the students would have to be able to figure out what would fit into the category. So what attributes of the data set and the values at the bottom, so fall and depreciate and save, which columns would they fit into? And what they'd have to do is figure out a pattern description at the bottom. So essentially, they're realizing that those that fit into the yes column would be things that really have positive numbers. And those that fit into the no column are those that do not have positive values. So electron, for example, is negatively charged. Spending costs money, so it's a negative. But credit is positive. So those are just one example of how you could use integers with the concept attainment. And another example here is, let's say you've done more work and more learning around integers, and you've done multiplication, etc. Here you can have a similar pattern format where you're asking what the pattern is. You have a yes and no column, and you have your data sets. And in this case, you really have to do some calculation to understand. There are some key features of using this sort of example here, which is you want to make sure that you don't reveal it too soon, and you want to be able to, the teacher should always supply the technical label. And I really feel that's important, because when it does come to any summative assessments, you want to make sure that you have described it appropriately. So when you do come to, at the bottom, the pattern description, that should be something that the teacher has described. Now, again, this is one example, and this is something that you could do within a technology, like you could have it within a Google form, or you could actually make it more interactive. But for the example here, for simplicity purposes, we just wanted to give you an example of what concept attainment would look like. Other points to make about this, and really for any pedagogical approach, it is important that teachers give clues and maybe mirror or model how they might start populating some of the columns. there. And students should have some successes early on. If they're not having those successes, then they might get frustrated, and then therefore they may not be as engaged with the task. And that's just one way concept attainment works. It's really understanding the attributes that fit. And so they have to understand some of the attributes of the concept they're learning and how it would fit into a common and when it wouldn't fit in. So things that you could use, we showed these patterns, but you could use puzzles, Venn diagrams, or in this case, a simple yes or no column. But again, they need to know the basic concepts of what they are being asked to deliver. So for example, if you look on the right, this is multiplication of integers. You would not, they would need to know how to multiply two integers, particularly two negative numbers, and what the result would be. You wouldn't have just done addition and subtraction. You would have had to also done multiplication with them. And I think an important point that I want to make about this is the formative assessment. So it's really important for teachers to really know where their students are, and using this kind of material, an example, can help teachers understand some of the challenges that students have, and whether or not all the class has challenges, because in that case, you may need to revisit teaching some of the basic concepts. So moving to there, I'm just wondering if any of you have used anything, either used the pedagogical concept attainment, have you used a similar type of puzzle or pattern here, or have you used a different approach? And if anyone wants to mention here, I'll look in the chat.
I'll jump in. It's Laura. I think a lot of times in teaching, we see Venn diagrams. I just think that often it's not necessarily recognized as concept attainment. So I think that idea of kind of brainstorming through the use of Venn diagrams and through the use of tools similar to that, I think it's more common than not.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of people may not put the name to it, but they already do a lot of these exercises or these pedagogical approaches. Personally, I agree with you with math. I've used a lot of Venn diagrams. I actually like that, where it's not just what's in and what's out, but also what's shared. Because you could, for example, if you look at area and surface area, you could talk about what is specific to area, what's specific to surface area, and then you could talk about what's shared between the two. So again, it's helping, but the whole idea behind this is that it's helping students to understand the concept, or the concepts being learned. Thanks, Laura. The next is concept formation. So this is where you're more applying the knowledge that has been learned. Again, this was developed by Jerome Bruner. And in this approach, students, it looks very similar to the last approach. The exception is, if you look, you still have a data set. You talk about the tasks they have to produce or do. But in this particular case, the students have the flexibility of being able to create their own headers or categorizations. And that allows them to then further investigate patterns that exist within the concept or the data that they're analyzing. And it allows them to analyze further the data that they're looking at and get more understanding. For example, in this particular case, looking at all these different data sets, you might provide to them that the product is negative and the product is odd, and you would show them how you would come up with those headers, and then you would encourage them to create their own. But in this case, you could, looking at the data, you might say, well, what are some of the ways you could come up with some of these headers? What are some of the strategies? could you look at the numbers and maybe add some of them together and look at some of the results? So you do want to guide them in certain ways or provide certain clues to help them to fill in these tables, these charts. And the difference between concept attainment is really there's more flexibility here in terms of what the students are, or what's the headers and the categorizations. I think an important thing to know here is that students do need time for this. So whether they're working individually or in groups is to ensure that they have the appropriate amount of time to get the idea. Collaborative apps are a really good way. So if you are doing online learning, having something like this and having like a whiteboard, I forget what it's called, but there's different Google whiteboards, for example, that they can use and draw and all share together as they come up with the categorizations, or just simply use, Google Slides or Google Forms, whatever, or Google Docs. Any of those can help as well, so that the students can start working together on these categorizations. But time is key, and I mentioned modeling, as well as at the end, students should be presenting what they come together. So if it is in groups, the idea of presenting this to their classmates is important, and allowing them the flexibility of how they present, maybe giving them options for multimodal. So they could do maybe a animation or a video, etc., to show what they came up with and how they came up with this categorization, or maybe even creating games, coding games, so that people can pick and choose and put in the correct column. So that is concept formation. And there's, I think, again, this is just one example of how to use this pedagogical approach. And I'm just going to go into the last one, which is inquiry training. So inquiry training is really, and I think quite a few of us have used this. It's essentially getting into the students' natural curiosity. So they're faced with a puzzling situation, and they have to think. They have to think through. It's a lot less guidance here, a lot more discovery. Now, this is just one example on there where it's sort of a mystery game. You have a question, a data set, and they have to solve and use yes/no questions. One thing I like about this is this would translate very nicely into coding, for example, because the yes/no could translate very nicely into logic within a code. So if yes, then this, if else, no, right? But there's various different ways. Personally, I might ask them, instead of giving them a question, I might ask them to develop some sort of question or game that they could pose to others. And that would challenge them to start to think about the details of the concept that they're learning. And they'd have to come up with a data set and a question and the ways to guide people to discovering the answer. That, to me, is really that next step of getting them to critically think about what they're learning and how to apply it in some sort of game. And it was developed by Richard Schuschman, this pedagogical approach. Some alternatives to that are, as I mentioned, games here. So, and I do like to mention games that are where the math is integrated in the storyline. So I'll do a comparison between something like Prodigy. So Prodigy is nice. That helps with students to practice their math, but it doesn't necessarily involve them using math in the gameplay. And so I particularly like to use games like adventure games where they actually have to apply math concepts, or coding where they actually code a game and they have to create ideas around how others will learn about those concepts. And then there's storytelling in math. So George has a lot of, he's used a lot of stories, nursery rhymes, fables, etc. And in there's lots of dilemmas, or there's questions, Red Riding Hood, should she go to grandma's house, etc. So those are just some examples of alternatives to inquiry where you could use stories to help explain math concepts and delve deeper into math concepts. And if you were using stories, you might want to come back together and talk about what were some of the ways, what was some of the concepts that you learned about and why. Just curious about your own examples of inquiry, because I feel like inquiry is something that is very broad and has been used by many of us in pedagogical approaches as a pedagogical approach. And so just to recap here, these are the pedagogical approaches. And as you can see to the left, the advanced organizer is really more teacher presentation, and it's sort of the spectrum moves down at the end until you have student inquiry, which is the inquiry training. But one thing to notice, this is not an order of pedagogical approaches. You don't have to necessarily do this in the order. So for example, I have led classes with inquiry training. So I've actually got them to create a game, for example, in Scratch. And then as they were creating the game, we then asked the group together afterwards, what did you notice about some of the numbers? For example, if they did a scoring game and had positives and negatives that came into play, you could then very nicely link it into integers as well. But you're starting this time with inquiry training. So again, this is not in any particular order, but it is the pedagogical approaches that you can try when you're teaching math. And it really does help, I think, the concept attainment, searching for those patterns, the concept formation, analyzing that data, and getting students more flexibility in terms of how they are what they understand about the concept. And then the inquiry, where they're really sort of delving in deeper and expanding their learning even further. Just to finish off here on the pedagogical approaches, it's always important to keep in mind the student needs. So as much as these are pedagogical approaches, we need to understand whether they actually understand these concepts and they are learning through this. And that is, to me, formative assessment. So ongoing constructive feedback with any assessment that comes in. I like to use what's called SWICs. I call it show what you know. So it's ways for me to assess, did they actually learn the concept, who has challenges, and also from the other end, those students who may be bored. They may have really understand it. They're flying through the material, and you want to really understand how you can challenge them more. And that comes to that personalized learning. So once you have that form of assessment, you know which students have challenges. You can provide them those additional guides, supports, and resources. And of course, it also ties to your guided groups here. In math, I particularly am very fond of guided groups. I'm wondering how many of you have actually used guided groups in if you've taught math or any subjects really. But particularly for those who've done math, if you could just say, you can comment or in the comment box. So is anyone not familiar with guided groups? If you could say, if you've used guided groups, if you could type in the chat box and say yes, or if you haven't used it, if you could say no. Yes. I used guided groups in a math block structure. Yes, I have used guided groups before. Yeah. So yeah, I really think that guided groups is important, and there's different ways you can set up your guided groups. So Teresa has not. So a guided group is really where you as the teacher form the group, and you put students in groups in a specific way. So for example, it could be by their, and I'm going to move this, their comprehension level. So let's say you have some students that have a little more challenges with the concept that they're learning. You might want to put them together, and then you have another group that maybe they're okay with the level, so they go in one group, and one that's very advanced, so they could go into another group. And then when you provide any of these material to them, or challenges or puzzles, etc., then you can cater that specifically to their level. So for example, if you have a more advanced group, you could actually add some additional challenges. And if you do have the group that has a little less knowledge or understanding of the material, you could actually change the way you approach the question, make it a little bit more coming back to some of the basics, a more simplified version. And then typically what I do as a teacher, then I will sit with the groups or spend some time to go through learning together or seeing how the learning is coming along, dropping in on each. So those are guided groups and a great way to actually meet student needs, I think particularly when we're learning math, but I think it can apply to many other subjects. And then student choice. So again, when you have student choice in anything that they present or in the way that you present it yourself as a teacher, using multimodal options, simulations, videos, etc., it really does help the students to get motivated, engaged, and meet their needs. So those are just some things to keep in mind no matter what pedagogical approach is decided upon. And lastly, I guess the question is, you know, a lot of these approaches, you don't need technology. But if you do, you can, I always like to keep in mind two things. One is, and I'm highlighting here the SAMR model, but I'm wondering how many of you are familiar, if you can say yes or no with the SAMR model. Yes, so Jeanette is. Now, yep. So the SAMR model is really looking at how you use technology and whether you're using it as just a substitution. So an example of a substitution would be like pen and paper versus a word processor, for example. Whereas redefinition all the way at the end here, that really transforms the learning. So it's where the task that was pretty generic before becomes that much more robust, more interactive, more engaging, etc., by using some form of technology that maybe has simulations or challenges embedded within it that help it. Now, there are some that criticize this model, so it's not always accommodated by all. But in this, what I think the point to make is that when you do consider technology, you might want to consider, are you really pushing that boundary between transforming the task versus just purely substituting? So when I think about using technology, I'm not just doing it as an add-on. I'm thinking about whether or not I'm actually making it, I'm helping the learning process. I'm helping them explore more and understand the concepts more. And then, of course, another option here is conceptualizing. So conceptualizing, sometimes you want to make sure that students do have that, like for example, when you're talking about surface area or volume, using a 2D image is not the best thing. And being able to go into something like Tinkercad, which is a 3D design environment where students can manipulate, is a much better option. So that's another reason why you might want to do technology. And also, I always say formative assessment. So yes, Prodigy is out there. It doesn't embed the math learning within the story, but it does provide some good formative assessment of whether students understand certain concepts. So now we're going to move on to teaching and learning, but just before we move on, just checking the comments. Okay, so I'm going to have Laura to take over for the teaching math online. Oh, your mic is on mute, and I'm going to take mine off.
Thank you. So for teaching math online, the one thing to remember is it is going to be similar to teaching kind of anything online. But the thing with math is it needs to be, you need to be doing stepwise so that there is the ability for assessment during as they're learning. Otherwise, it tends to, they tend to get kind of caught up. And it's hard to determine where students are. So you want to go to the next slide, Margie? So for online learning, communication occurs in real time. So there can be synchronous lessons, which essentially just means that you are conferencing with students in some sort of video chat, just like we're doing right now. So there's immediate feedback, which means that you can actually say to your kids, okay, no, we need to fix this process, make sure that they are going through the process effectively. There's more responsive interaction. There's more of that connection, just like you would see in a classroom setting. It's a lot easier to deliver feedback in a way that students will understand versus just reading what you've typed in a comment for them. So it enhances that kind of one-on-one interaction with the students. The one thing to remember with synchronous, though, is it might be difficult for students to attend live meetings. Right now, in the middle of this pandemic, I know for the classes that I'm teaching, not every student can be online from 9 to 10 on Tuesday mornings. So one of the nicest things is it can be recorded. That it makes it difficult because you don't have that immediate feedback for those students that are watching the video, but students might have the same questions. So if during your synchronous hour or however long you decide to do for the synchronous, questions are asked, you might be answering the questions for students that aren't present. And if not, there's always that option to record yourself answering as well. And then there's also asynchronous. So if I go to the next slide. So this is when communication occurs at different times. I often think of like emails. You get an email and you respond when you can. So there's more think time. So when you're asked a question as a teacher, you have time to actually think about, okay, what is the best way for me to formulate this answer? Depending on one who's asking the question, maybe recording yourself in a video explaining the concept is better for this student versus typing out a response. You're able to go more in depth, so you're able to actually maybe introduce the idea through a different lens. More flexibility for communication. Again, you could type the answer, you could record a video of yourself. You have more options there. Timely, consistent, and predictable responses are very important. So I know for me, again, as a teacher, I've told my students that I am live online looking at my emails every day from 9 to 10 in the morning. And they know that, okay, if I'm working, if they're doing their work and they have a question, they can then post a comment or ask a question and I will answer almost immediately. So that is really important because these kids are relying on it. The students are relying on it. So that aspect of kind of reliability as a teacher is really important with online learning because you're not in the classroom. You're not in the traditional classroom, so you can't provide that feedback. So they need to have trust that you will do that in a timely manner. The next slide talks about blended learning. So actually taking those two worlds and putting them together. So digital, virtual, online learning experiences blended with kind of tangible, embodied, real-world learning experiences creates for really good blended learning, which I think a lot of people, again, during this pandemic, I've seen quite a bit of this. So that learning online and taking the content that teachers are teaching online, but also learning more about cooking, looking at chemistry in the kitchen, taking that idea of, okay, I want to go outside and draw on the sidewalk with chalk. How long is this chalk going to last me if I draw at this pace? Recognizing in the real world where those math connections are, I think it's pretty relevant right now in our society. And then the next slide here talks about Bloom's taxonomy with math apps. So I don't know, Margie, do you want to speak to this one?
Sorry, took off my mic. Yeah, so basically looking at Bloom's, the traditional Bloom's taxonomy, which has the creating, the top, I believe, or maybe it's remembering. Anyways, it's like that pyramid. And what we've done is this chart has each of those categorizations. So you have creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, or remembering. And remembering is sort of that base. It's sort of like your, almost like memorization. And these are the apps that will support memorizing or remembering a concept. And then understanding is sort of your next level up in the pyramid. Think about that concept attainment, where the students are now getting a deeper understanding and making connections, and these apps will help you to make more connections with the learning concepts. And then applying, then going up, now you're talking about the concept formation, and these are the apps. So that's sort of how this relates to the Bloom's taxonomy, to all the way at the top, where they're actually able, this is more inquiry again, where you're really delving deeper into the task, they're getting more critical thinking, etc.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, that idea that although it's online, it can still be effective learning through these kinds of apps being used in a methodical kind of way versus just kind of throwing it out there to be used.
And just one thing about these apps, a lot of these are elementary, so they're quite, some of these might be quite basic in terms of what they're actually helping them with. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at some of these apps, what level they might support at.
Okay, and then there's kind of like, we've got a few slides of just kind of best practice for online learning. So creating teacher presence. So by creating mini lessons and challenges that they can do at home, so that students can do at home or in their surroundings. This is very similar to the idea of chunking material. It can be overwhelming for a lot of students to maybe get all of their tasks at the beginning of the week and have a deadline to have them done. Beyond just learning the content, they're now learning new technologies, new ways to use the technology. So that idea of chunking becomes super, super relevant when it's online. Setting up regular check-ins. So I know for me, I have office hours, what I'm calling office hours for my students. They can pop online. And then if they need any help with any of their work throughout the week, they just write their questions down throughout the week. Or they can email me, but I find it easier when I'm online. They know I'm going to be online, and they can just kind of pop on, ask me the question, get their answer right away, and then move on with the content. So that regular check-in, again, I kind of mix synchronous and asynchronous, and I think that's fine. You can choose how it works for you. Right now, with a lot of the unions, we're being told not to do one-on-one conferencing with the students. So there's a bit of kind of red tape that needs to be figured out as we move forward with online learning. But that's just kind of part of the process. Not only does this help students, keeps them kind of in line with where they should be at during their work, because you're not in the classroom saying, okay, keep on task, keep working, get your work done. You only have 10 minutes. So by keeping up with these check-ins, it keeps them accountable and on top of their work in a way that they're not going to get caught at the end of the semester with all their work left to do. Keep content, resources, and work submission process digital. So if you're able to just keep everything online, I know it's a bit of a process teaching kids how to fill in PDFs online with their Chromebooks, how to submit their work online on Google Classroom. But it's a skill that once they have it, it's something that becomes much more streamlined for both you and the students. Yeah, Jeanette, go ahead.
Sorry, I had to find my mic. I'm just wondering if we could poll the participants and see, because we're a few weeks into online learning now, to see whether they need us to go through, flip the next few slides in any kind of detail. Because it would be, if they are already doing online learning, it might be beneficial just to jump right into the next section. So can I ask the participants, if you have the slide deck in front of you, we were going to be talking about how to flip a classroom, how to engage your parents during this unprecedented time, how to create community online, and how do you make learning visible. Which of those, or maybe all of them, would you like to hear about? I just, knowing that some of you are already numeracy coaches, I don't want to go over things that you already are very familiar with. So if you want to make a comment in the chat, and if you want to just preview the next couple of slides, and then if there's anything there that you really want Laura and Margie to discuss. Or would you rather jump right into the hands-on or go to the next section on math and coding and then jump in?
So we have Andrew that says, I like the engage and community slides. Laura, who says, I'm fine to move on or to continue with this, whatever is best for the group. Any other thoughts? Fine to move on if that works.
Yeah, I think these slides are pretty self-explanatory. If anyone has any questions about this content, please feel free to take a look at the slides and then just pop your question in the chat. But I think maybe, yeah, we can move on. I'm okay with that.
All right, and there's just some resources there. So coding and math, I'm not going to go into why code. I feel that a lot of that's self-explanatory. I want to ask you, and I'm asking all participants, if you could just write down, why do you think it's important or not important to code? So if you could just type something that stands out to you, why you think you should code or not code. To me, I think probably the most important that stands out to me is innovate with technology versus purely consuming technology. So I've done a lot of research recently that is showing that students are very good in using technology, but there's a lot of, there's not as much innovating with creating with technology. And that's where I think coding has such an important part to play. Andrew says, I like the problem solving and the collaboration of coding. And the other Andrew says, student agency in learning math. Absolutely. Students get so many transferable skills from coding, critical thinking, problem solving, perseverance. Absolutely, Stacy. So those are just some of the reasons why, but I feel like there's just so many reasons to explain. And I think it is also an individual thing too for teachers as well. What stands out to you most? These are just some of the things that coding helps, some very specific things in terms of motions and logics, etc. And what's the amazing thing about a lot of this is that it's not just one concept that it teaches. And I love this here. Jacqueline says, kids love it. It's engaging and they can become experts and teach others. Absolutely. So if this slide is there for you. Examples are here. But I think an important one to mention is this second slide, which is one thing about coding is it doesn't just teach about the one concept. Even doing something simple like moving across a stage and talking to another character, or if it hits a wall and stops, you could be talking about motion, you could talk about rotation, you could talk about logic. So there's so many different concepts in here. And when we have a crowded curriculum as it is, being able to address as many concepts with one task is as benefit. And of course, as Jacqueline mentioned, it encourages that creativity. So I love the ability. This on the left is actually motion geometry. So it's really about creating very beautiful things. And again, links to other subjects as well. So all of these are examples of why and how it links to math. And from the past, actually, how many of you are familiar with Logo? SEMA, created by or used by Seymour Papert. How many of you have heard of Logo with that little turtle? Logo, awesome, Andrew. So for those of you that haven't used it, it was actually created by Seymour Papert, and it's a coding environment. As you can see, it's not block coding. And what it was developed for as a mathematical learning language. And as Seymour Papert mentioned, it's got that low floor and high ceiling. So you're really getting students who have very minimal understanding of coding and math to the students that have a lot of understanding and the ability of coding, so they can explore even deeper concepts. So that's really the past. today we tend to look at things like, I'll give you an example, is Scratch. Now, that's just one example. And I guess my question to you is, to the audience, how many of you know Scratch, have used Scratch, or have used Scratch? If you could type in yes or no. I'm just curious here. I know it was coding was asked, but I want to go back to, I've used it. Yes. So coding was
even if you've heard about it.
Minimal use, yeah. Yes, to Scratch. So I know some might have more familiarity, others a little less, but Scratch is really a child-friendly coding environment. We're going to use it today in our hands-on session to actually guide you and work with you on a type of lesson that you could create with math and coding. But it was developed or co-developed with Resnick, Mitch Resnick, and he sort of he looked at that low ceiling, high floor, and he added a term called wide walls, which is really allowing students to now, of many different interests and many different learning styles, to become engaged. So that's really where we are today. And with coding today, it's not just about math. It actually is about a lot of different subjects. Like you can touch upon stories and English, etc. But I think the idea is that the math is always there. And when you go into block coding, it just makes it a little bit easier to actually code versus remembering a whole different syntax language. So the coding of the future, well, who knows what the coding of the future is going to be? I'd like to ask you what you kind of think will be the next step in coding, because when I looked at it, I said, right now, I think what's going to happen is it's going to be just something that we don't even have keyboards anymore. I had another image where it was somebody's arm and that was the keyboard. And then I've also heard ideas that coding may not even be as relevant, because what will happen is it'll be more about visual or sound commands that just say do this or do that, and it gets translated. So the future is broad, but I think the important thing is right now the opportunities are there to use coding with math to great success. And that's really the last part of this session. Yes, someone has to code the translation of sound to action, and you're exactly right. So coding will always be important to some degree. And I think also, if you think about the future and think about things like Internet of Things, where you have full cities that could possibly become those smart cities, then it's how you code those environments, how you design those environments becomes so important. So learning these skills, I think will be important. And I also just think this is my personal observation. When I see students go in and using Scratch, for example, and they're coding, the vocabulary, the math vocabulary that comes out of them naturally is amazing to me. Their ability that they just 90 degrees like this, or rotations, or, oh, I need the distance, and oh, what's the velocity? They start speaking this language sometimes without even totally understanding it. So the ability to sort of work with those connections, when we come back to that pedagogical approach of an advanced organizer, becomes so much easier at that point. So that is our last slide. And next we're going to move into the hands-on portion led by Laura. So do you want to take over, Laura? Do you want me to, what would you like to do?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to stop sharing here.
All right, I will start. Let me just get this up here. Okay, so what we are going to be doing for this activity, I'm going to be running something similar to what I would do with a class. We're going to be looking at surface area, and we're going to go through kind of the steps that, as a teacher, you could do with regards to the pedagogies that Margie spoke about earlier. So, all right. Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so Scratch coding, you guys, some of you mentioned that you have seen it or have used it. It's probably one of my favorite technologies to use with students because it is so flexible with what you can do. So, like I said, we're going to be doing the application of the pedagogy that Margie spoke about earlier. We're going to be using Scratch to demonstrate surface area. To start off, though, for the advanced organizer, to activate pre-knowledge of surface area, some questions you could ask include, what is area? What kind of shapes would we find area for? Are we using two-dimensional shapes, three-dimensional shapes? Okay, but then what is surface area? What kind of shapes would we be using that surface area idea for? What functions do we need to know how to do in order to find surface area? So are we adding? Are we subtracting? Are we multiplying? What different functions do we need to know? Where do we see surface area in the real world? So an example there would be how much paint we need to cover the walls in a room. So we need to determine the surface area. What are some equations that we could use to find surface area? So the area of a cube, how are we going to find the surface area of a cube? So I've set up a Padlet here, and I think Margie just popped it up, but yeah, she just put the link in the chat. Margie, are you still seeing the slides right now, or do you see the Padlet?
I see the Padlet.
Perfect. Okay, so this is how I've set up kind of collecting data. I really love Padlet because I've created now these columns that have the questions at the top. Students that can then, or you guys in this case, can then go in, write your answer. I can see who has said what so that I know who has understanding of surface area. Just for sake of time, I'm not going to actually go through this, but these are some kinds of questions that you could ask to kind of activate that pre-knowledge for students. Again, using the Padlet, I find is super effective with regards to keeping everything organized and recognizing which students understand which aspects of the concept. So that's the advanced organizer. It's kind of like the diagnostic step.
Actually, Laura,
Yep.
I just to that point, one of the things that I've done with some of the students that I've looked at with surface area is I've also talked about some of the apps that they use, like if they've used Minecraft and played with Minecraft, to connect with that too. If they're having challenge with some of the basic concepts, it's to, okay, remember when you built this house in Minecraft and you had to, remember this side was 4 bricks along, etc. It sometimes can help them connect also with that knowledge. So as she's asking these questions, some of them might need a little more guidance with what they know about or what they've used in the past to kind of to work with that concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in addition to these questions, you could ask questions about Scratch because that's also relevant in this activity that we're doing. So have you used Scratch before? What do you know about Scratch? It doesn't necessarily have to be just about surface area. So then moving on to concept attainment. We're now going to, I've got these two kind of bubbles set up, and then these different words that can just be dragged into the correct box. So when we're talking about surface area, does the term multiplication belong or not belong in the concept? And you can just put your answer in the comments.
Someone says
awesome.
yes.
So yes. So I'm going to then just drag this over into belongs. This kind of activity is very similar to, I don't know if you guys had smart boards in any of your schools or if anyone's used the smart board. They had this app that you could get that students would actually go up to the board and click on the answers and drag them into the corresponding bubbles. This is very similar. And you could actually have students do this so that, again, you could go back if you were to give this to them on Google Classroom, give each student a copy of the presentation so they each have their own. They go through and actually do this activity, and then you can go back and look at how they did in this concept attainment aspect so that you can then apply that moving forward because you have that insight. Area, belong or not belong?
Yes.
So you'd go through all of them. You can determine which words you would want to include. And then I've also put down here, is there anything else you can think of that students might accurately or inaccurately connect with surface area? So as the teacher of the class, you could actually put the words that you think might either stump them or maybe not necessarily stump them. You're not trying to stump them, but kind of addressing misconceptions that a lot of students have. So if you're able to put those terms on here, you can then address those misconceptions so that moving forward, they have a clear understanding of what surface area is. So again, not going to spend a ton of time on that just because it's relatively straightforward. Concept formation. So moving forward, what we're going to do is I'm going to have you guys each either create a Scratch account or log on to your Scratch account. And I'm going to kind of talk you through a tutorial of creating a net for a cube. So this is something that you could also do with your class, or you could give them the challenge versus actually taking them through a tutorial. So if you guys want to go on to Scratch, I'll give you a few minutes to get logged on. You don't actually have to have an account, but if you'd like to share it with us so that we can take a look at it during the last step, which is the inquiry, you do need to have an account. So if you log on and then go on to your Create board, maybe just let me know in the chat when you're logged on and ready to go, and then I will start the tutorial.
For those of you that don't have an account, you can. We do encourage you to get an account, but you can go to the very beginning if you look at that link and start coding right away. There's an option to start creating, I believe it's called, but the link is there in the chat for anyone that needs the access. And if, as Laura said, if you could just let us know that you're ready, and if everyone's ready, we're looking for everyone's comments saying they're ready. Correct, Andrew. So that's the one thing, you can't save your work. So when I'm working with students, I always encourage them to actually create a Scratch account. I actually usually have the studio I create, so I can ask all students to save it in one particular location, but they also have teacher accounts in Scratch now too. And you're right, it can be used offline. It doesn't have to be used all online. There's a desktop version. Thanks, Andrew. So I think we got most of them already.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot there's two of you. That's what's throwing
Yeah,
me off.
sorry.
That's okay.
One screen.
Okay. So Scratch, it's really, once you get the opportunity to kind of play around with it, it becomes a lot easier. It's one of, again, my favorite technologies to use with students because it is so versatile in what you can do. There's tons of tutorials available, but I wanted to take the time today to actually talk you through a specific tutorial connecting to surface area that I've developed. So to start off, what I'm going to do is have you put the stage. So change the stage. So you're going to go in here, you're going to click, and then up here, if you search for grid, there's a number of options. You've got the Cartesian plane, a number of different ways. We are going to take the 30 pixel grid. That means that each one of these blocks is 30 pixels either side. So that becomes really important when you're using math here because if you need to know specific measurements, if you want students to be drawing, let's say, a cube that's 3 by 3 by 3 by 3, they need to know the pixel sizes so they know how far to have their character go. Down here, this is your sprite. It's your character. Right now, I've got the Scratch Cat. I'm going to switch that out, though, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to get a pencil. This is one of the things that students will love to kind of play with. They really like to be kind of creative, and that's one aspect of this where they can actually kind of personalize the activity. Scratch has kind of changed over the years. It used to have the command over here, which was called a pen, where you could actually draw. They've made it like an additional, an add-on. So it is still here, it's just in a different place. You can see you've got tons of different add-ons here now. You can use your Lego Mindstorm EV3s. We do microbits, which are also really awesome. But we're going to use pen today. So if you just click pen, it gives you a ton of different commands here now that weren't there before. Okay, so those we are going to be using today. So the task for this tutorial is to create a net for a cube. So some of the background knowledge we would need to know for that are, what are the sides of a cube? What shape makes up the sides of a cube? Square, yeah. So that's something that, again, you're activating pre-knowledge with students. How many squares are we going to have to draw? 6, yeah. And so in this activity, we actually bring in loops, because not only do we have to do a loop, because how many sides does a square have? 4, thank you. So what we're going to do is you're actually going to see that I loop the code 4 times. So you draw one side, and then we're going to turn our pen 90 degrees. Again, you've got angles in there. Then we're going to do the loop so that we can draw all 4 sides. To start off, what I'm going to do, over here on the left, you've got your different commands, your codes. Every time you start any kind of code, you're going to want to use one of these pieces. It essentially says, okay, start the code. So when we're using the pencil or the pen, over time, I've learned that we need to clear it. We need to have some sort of command to clear. Oh, sorry, Jacqueline. If you go down here to this plus, it's adding extensions. I was saying they've changed the layout of Scratch a bit. So pen used to be in the normal controls, but they've changed it. So if you go to add extension and click pen, it'll then add your extensions for your pen. Perfect. So our first step, like I said, is to code so that we have a way to erase all the pen that's been drawn. Because you'll notice that through trial and error, you will make mistakes and you'll have pen written on your page and you'll want to get rid of it somehow. So I really like the idea of using spacebar to clear your page. It's kind of like those Etch sketches. You could just shake them and then start again. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, pen up, which means your pen is going to be off the paper or off the screen. And then you're going to put in erase all. If you didn't say pen up, it would continue drawing. So our next step, so that's just kind of setting up our screen so that we can kind of be neat. Our first step now is going to be to create a square, one square. So you can determine how big you want the square. Like I said, each block, each distance here is 30 pixels. So I really like the kind of aesthetic look. It's big enough of 3 by 3. So you know that your side length is going to be 3 times 30, so 90 pixels long. You'll notice here, you've got your Cartesian plane. That is where your sprite is going to be drawing, or that's where it'll start. So I'm going to start. I want my sprite to start at negative 180 and, oops, and 30. I just found that that's a good starting point as I was going, because I'm going to draw from left to right on my screen. So now we're going to go up here to motion. So when I click my green flag, which is up here, I want to start drawing my first square. The one thing that you need to set up with this is point in direction. If you don't determine which direction you want your sprite to point in, right now it's pointed 90 degrees, which means it's going to move this way. You can switch it. So here you can see the degrees where it's pointing. Right now it's pointing to the right, which means that the pen will start drawing from left to right. If we were to switch that to say negative 90, it would draw from right to left. So we want to make sure that we determine that at the beginning, because otherwise it kind of decides where it wants to draw. So by explicitly saying, no, I want you to point in the direction of 90, it'll draw the same way every time. You're now going to want this one here. We just want to make sure that every time we click this green flag, it's going to go to the same spot and start in the same spot. Okay, so that's at that negative 180 and 30. Now we're going to go to our control panel. Like I said, because squares have 4 sides, and we want them all to be the same length, we can do a repeat block and repeat everything that we put inside here 4 times, because we have 4 sides. Okay. So now you're going to go back to your pen. You're going, I like to choose different colors for each square that I'm drawing, just to show, okay, here's square 1, here's square 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you would like to change your color, you can. You're then given the option of kind of the spectrum. We'll just go red to start with. And then you're going to put a weight block in. The weight blocks are really important. If you ever work on Scratch with students and they're getting frustrated because they're not seeing kind of the process work. So if I didn't use any weight options, you would see the net really, really fast. You wouldn't see the steps of it drawing one side, then the next, then the next, then the next. So the weight function is super important in something like this. You're now going to say, okay, I want to take my pen and I want to put it down, which means I want it to start drawing. Okay. I'm now going to go up to my motion and I'm going to say, okay, now I want you to move 90 steps. Does anyone remember why I'm moving 90 steps? Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Jacqueline. So each one of those blocks that I have on my grid is 30 pixels. So I want it to be 3 blocks for my length and my width. So I'm going to go 90 steps. Each step is a pixel. Okay, so if students are having a hard time with that, if you put 1 here, you're not going to see any difference because pixels are so small. Now you're going to want to turn 90 degrees. Again, this is something that you could talk to your students about. Why are we turning 90 degrees? What would happen if we turn too much? What would happen if we turn too little? That's that inquiry piece. They can actually start to look, okay, well, if we go too big of an angle, after we draw our 4 sides, they're not going to match up. They're not going to end at the right point. And then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to lift it up so it no longer draws right now. So as I go through this process personally, I am constantly stopping and trying it just to see if it works. So I'm going to now click my green flag and see what happens. All right. So I've got 1 square. So that's the start of our code. We now want to draw 5 more squares that are connected to create our net for our cube. I don't know if any of you guys noticed, if I hit space now, that pen marks will go away, which is awesome. But I want you guys to take notice down here at your coordinates as the pen draws, because it actually tracks your coordinates. So you can determine where each vertice is. So it starts at negative 180, 30. Now this vertice over here is at negative 90 and 30. Top one is negative 90, 120. And again, you can see the math there with regards to the Cartesian plane. It makes sense that from the first one, from our first, oh, see, that's what happens if you don't do the clear your pen. It'll just keep drawing. But if you look at your x coordinate here, right, we went from negative 180 to 90, which is a difference of 90, which makes sense because we moved 90 steps. Okay, so then moving on, does anyone have any questions? Perfect. Okay, if you have questions throughout, just post it in the chat. I have it on the side that I can see. So, like I said, you're going to need to draw 6 squares. So what you could do is you could either take this and just redo it 6 times. You could put different information in. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to start using a broadcast. So I'm going to say, okay, once this square is made, I want to broadcast a message that tells this next piece of code to start. So now I'm going to duplicate. Yeah, Margaret, talk like this kind of a lesson. You can talk a lot about the different math concepts. It's a really good kind of lesson that you could do near the end, middle to end of a unit to actually kind of consolidate understanding. So I'm now going to duplicate my code because again, I just want to draw another square. It's just going to be in a different location. So I'm not going to change the steps. I'm not going to change the degrees. I am going to change the pen color just because that's my preference. You don't have to. And I'm going to change where it starts. This time though, I want to make sure that it starts here in this corner because I need my squares to be connected so that I can make my net. So this vertex here was at negative 90 and 30. So I'm now going to change this. Okay, so I have it starting here. It's going to draw my square again, and then it's going to broadcast message 2. If I kept that as message 1, this would just continue happening because message 1 activates this code. So I'm going to clear my screen. I'm now going to start my code and see what happens. All right, and then because I have no code activated by message 2, it'll just stop. Okay. So again, message 2 is going to activate my next one. So I'm going to switch this to message 2. I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to switch my starting location. So your next vertice is going to start here. Notice how I'm starting in the same spot on every square I make. The first square I started here, second square I started here, third square I started here. That ensures that I can keep my code the same when I duplicate. If you were to start up in this corner or up in this vertice, you'd have a square up here. Okay, or you could change your commands. It's up to you. So my next one, I'm going to start down here, but I'm going to watch and see what my coordinate is once my pencil is down there. So it's 0 and 30. So I'm going to change this, change my pen color, and change message 2 to message 3. I turn the other way. So, Andrew, that's fine. Is it working okay for you? Yeah, it shouldn't matter which way you turn, because they're both 90 degrees. It's just which way the square is being drawn. Good. And honestly, a lot of students are going to do the same kinds of things, and that's fabulous. That's one of the best parts about this is there's no one way to do anything on here. Some students will find ways just to use a repeat block to do all of this. Some students will find ways to kind of cut down on the amount of work that they're doing to get the same result. And that's one of my favorite things about this is then coming together with all of the creations they've made. They've had the same task, then coming together and saying, okay, let's look at what everyone has, right? And comparing, okay, what code is different, why, how do we end up with the same kind of end result, but we all have different code. Good. So again, message 2, when I receive message 2, I'm going to start drawing. So I'm the kind of coder that I really like to see it happening as I'm working on it, just because I like fixing problems right away. Some students will go through and do the whole code, run it, and then problem solve. Again, that's part of the kind of beauty of doing this kind of activity. So now when I receive message 3, that was the last one we did down here. So message 3, I am going to duplicate. And I want this vertex down here. So what you can actually do is instead of redrawing all of this, you can just click on this piece of code and it'll just draw that one. So I don't know if you saw that, but that vertex down here is at 90, 30. So I'm going to switch here, 90, 30. I'm going to switch my color. And I'm going to run this to see what happens. There we go. Oh, see how it continues going? It's because at the bottom of this one, I'm broadcasting message 3. Message 3 activates this piece of code. So if you don't either take this off or switch it, it'll just continue going. You'll see now that I took it off, it stopped. We're going to switch out to message 4 though. We're going to clear our screen. Okay, so now we're going to do our last. Okay, so now we have our 4 squares for our kind of net for the backbone of our cube. We're now going to have to determine, okay, where do I want my sides to be? Where can I put them so that if I were to fold this net together, it would create a cube. So again, that's something that the students can kind of choose. They could decide, okay, I want to have a square down here beside my blue square, and then a square up here beside my pink. It's really up to them where they decide to put it. I haven't made the best decision with regards to where I put my straight line because you're not going to be able to see the cube up here. But it's not the end of the world. The other thing you could do is switch the way that it turns. So instead of 90 degrees, I'm going to turn 180. Yeah, it's definitely a teachable moment. There's ways around it. So you'll see that if I switch my turn to 180, and then I start in the same place. Oh, sorry, not 180. 270. Actually, I think you can do negatives. It's kind of confusing for students if they're trying to learn degrees. All right, so now I've got my squares drawing down here. So now I have room up here to draw my side square for my net. Okay, So I know it's kind of hard to see because my screen, I don't know how to, I don't know how to change the sizing of this. I know it's kind of hard to see all of our code so far. But you're now going to want to create a square on either side. Doesn't matter where, but on either side of our kind of backbone so that it makes the sides of the cube. So we're going to, again, copy this because we still want to make our square. This code makes the square. Okay. We're going to say, okay, when I receive message 4, top right above the stage and knob to make the coding perfect. Oh, thank you. Oh, I see that. Okay. Oh, that's not what I want. Perfect. So when I receive message 4, that was our last one we did, message 4. I'm going to switch this to broadcast message 5. And you could change this to pink square, purple square, green square. It doesn't need to be message. So now I'm going to put my side down here from my purple. So if I go back to my 3rd square, I want to start in the same location. So this was my 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Again, that's where the colors come into play. It's my purple square. So I started at 0, 30. So I'm again going to make my coordinates 0 and 30. But if I leave this like this, I'm just going to redraw this purple square. Okay. So if I'm starting here, I now want to either switch the direction that I'm drawing or change the angle. So instead of negative 90 degrees, I'm going to say 90. Okay. Oh, I forgot we flipped it. So that's actually this vertex up here. Okay, so we're starting at 0, 30, which is up here. So now I've got my one side up here. All I did was switch the way that my drawing turned. It used to say negative 90 so that it could draw the purple square. I now want it to be a positive 90 so that it goes up. Is everyone following that? Okay, again, if you have any questions throughout, just post it in the chat. And now our last square. I'm going to go back to my purple one to find out what the coordinates of this vertex is, so that's where I start my next piece of code. So I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to take off all the color just so I don't get confused. I'm going to click, and I'm going to pause. So this vertex over here is located at 90, 30. So I'm going to start at 90, 30. And this is when I receive message 5. And we're going to switch our turn degrees to negative 90 again. I think that's effective. Yeah. Oh. That color is really hard to see. Not an ideal color. All right. So now we've got our last side there. Let's see it all in action.
And what I love about this, Laura, is like there's so many teachable moments here. Like you could gauge the class to say, you know, what angle would I go here? I went 90 degrees here. Should I go 90 degrees here? You know, there's so many different ways that they can start to understand the concepts that much better.
Oh, yeah. And even just so, if I don't know if anyone noticed, but that last square I drew is not in the right spot. That's not going to make a net. We only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares. So I need to switch something on that last piece of code that I've got so that the square goes down here versus on top of the one we've already got.
And that be a good example to give to students is maybe incorrect ones and sometimes, and they fix those. So another way for them to really test sort of whether they got the concept or not, or they understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I had 90 in here, it draws it up here. If I have negative 90, it draws it here. So there's different ways that you could go about troubleshooting. I'd say the easiest one is to switch where you start. So right now we're starting right here at at 90, 30. If we just switch our y coordinate by 30, so if we start at 90 and 0, we're going to hit the spot that we want. Oh, sorry, not 30, 0, negative 40. I only took away 30. I'll also clear that. Okay. So again, if we start from the beginning, okay, so that starting point is inaccurate. Sorry, yes, negative 60. Thank you.
And yeah, that's great. I mean, see, so your students are now the ones that are sort of working through this, and they start to be able to say, hey, I think I know. And I love that part because that gets your students really engaged and thinking and saying, okay, well, wait, this didn't matter. And then they start to understand their angles a lot better, and being able to translate that, even if you're not even focusing on angles at that point, like it's surface area, but they're learning about that. So that's the great thing about coding, I think.
Exactly. Oftentimes when I'm doing workshop with students, I will purposefully make mistakes and have them call me out on it. One, they love to be right when I'm not, but it also demonstrates their understanding, and without me having to say, okay, what's wrong? What do we need to do? Or how can you explain to me angles? If they can tell me, okay, well, this is what's wrong, they're demonstrating their understanding in that sense. So moving forward, after going through a tutorial like this with students, I would then say, okay, we're going to stop that. Now I want you to go back and make a net for, depending on what age, a triangular prism. So again, what are the different shapes that you're going to need to know how to draw? Where are they going to connect? What kind of information do you need to know in order to create some sort of triangular prism? Okay. So that's kind of the basic lesson. Did everyone follow along? Was everyone able to get their net drawn? Awesome. Awesome, Andrew. And other Andrew, fabulous. All right, Laura's almost done. Yeah. The Andrews. So Margie, do you want to show them how to put it into the studio so we can take a look?
Absolutely. You got those slides up there. So
yep.
Hopefully everybody has created a user account. So this is where, again, I mentioned that you could start creating in Scratch, but in order for us and as a teacher to be able to see their work, they really need an account. And there are student class options, but in this case, we'd like to see if you want to share some of your, or if you as a teacher want to be able to see their Scratch codes or projects. I'm not sure if you can see this screen or not, but on the left-hand side, when you're in that coding environment, you can actually click up at the top and hit share. And when you do that, then you scroll down and you will see an add to studio option. Now, if it's your class, if they're part of a class, then they will see an option here. But if it's not, did you hit share, right?
Yep, add studio. Yeah.
Share. So what you have to do is that you actually have to start. This works well if you're part of a class. In order to find a studio, in this case, because you don't have it, you're actually going to have to search in there for online Scratch learning. And if you just type in the search, you can find it that way. The instructions I had, sorry, were for if you're part of a class. So the one I have is called specifically online Scratch learning. Oh, let me make sure that it is public. Hold on a second. I was using it as a class, so hold on a second. I'm just going to, I'm going in it right now. And
So if you were to do some sort of online tutorial like this, or meeting with your class, this is one way that you could have control to share their creations versus having them share their screens. Again, kind of getting around some of those privacy issues that a lot of the teacher unions have been talking about, because students sharing their screens sometimes could be, I guess, that breach of privacy. So by sharing their creations with you, you then have control of the ability to share and then have them kind of speak to their creation.
So Laura, the one that, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. The one that there it is. Yeah. So I made it, should be public. I just clicked it again. And now you can see, so someone has, this probably, is that Andrew? I'm not sure because Andrew's been in another class where he did it. So, but if you all save your projects in there, then we can see them. And then as a teacher, you can then, I think the most important thing is to troubleshoot, you know, when they go, because sometimes they might encounter a problem that you may need to work with them, and being able to see that code is really important.
So even just seeing between mine and Andrew's, you can see that the nets are different. So that's a conversation starter right there. Okay, what's different about these, and will they still make a cube? Why can we have them look different, but they'll still work?
Yeah, so if they want to continue on, they can actually create that triangular prism, just like you mentioned. That could be their challenge that they work on now. Got a little bit of time. And then we could see, and if you want to add that in there, we could actually take a look at that.
Yeah, exactly. So if I wanted to look inside Andrew's creation, I can just click it, see inside, lets me actually look at, okay, what was done. You can see it's very different. He actually created his own block, which is square. So he said, okay, start at this vertice, make a square, this vertice, make a square. So his is a lot more condensed than the one that I used, which is fabulous. But again, that he made his own block in order to do that. It's to the right. Oh, okay. So he used the same information as us, but he said define square. So he's defining the block, changing the color. He's then going to start drawing, draw 4 sides. His wait is 0.2 seconds, probably better than my one. 1 second seems like a really long time when you're drawing some squares. But once he's defined that idea, that concept, he can then use that square, that command over here, so that every time he puts that block here, it draws a square, draws this square. So if we run it, see, his moves a lot quicker than mine. And there we go. Okay. Awesome. The other option too is remix. So if someone was inspired by someone else's work, you could do remix and actually go in and have their own copy of it and change it. I just like to see everything laid out for me. But yeah, honestly, my sister's boyfriend is a computer engineer, and he said that all computer engineers essentially do is just trying to cut down on code. They want it to be as kind of direct as possible. Awesome. So we've got a few more up here. If your code is public, anyone can see it if they click on it. But yeah, like Margie said, if you would like to take the next maybe 10 minutes, we've got about a few minutes at the end that we want to wrap everything up, but take some time now, see if you can figure out how to make a square. There your angles come in. It becomes very important that you're getting your angles right. You can start talking about isosceles, scaling, different kinds of triangles, what you would need for that triangular prism net. Laura just said in the chat, I think the younger students, it helps to go through the process first, reflect on what they're seeing, and then condense the code. Yeah, it really depends on their level of understanding when it comes to coding. Some students are going to go right to that condensed code, and that's okay if they understand that. Other students are going to need it kind of spelled out for them the way that I did, and that's okay too. That's where the kind of personalization of this technology comes into play.
And I think also you could do that overview and then maybe do guided groups where some that may understand some of the concepts more, you could put them together. Maybe they have more advanced Scratch knowledge. You can actually ask them to create maybe the make blocks or try the triangular prisms. For example, if you have some that are struggling a little more, they go together in a group and they could have maybe a very focused challenge for them. That's one thing I love about guided groups.
Does anyone have any questions about the process? No, I'm not seeing anything come up. So the last step of the pedagogy that we've been talking about is the inquiry training. So now that you have used Scratch to create a net for a cube, create a net for another 3D shape. In this case, you guys can kind of choose. But for your class, it'd be effective to dictate which shape they might make. But also giving them option gives them that choice. So if you've taught them a number of different kinds of 3D shapes, you say, okay, now go create another net for any shape you choose. In that sense, they're showing you their understanding of angles. They're showing you their understanding of nets. They're showing you their understanding of surface area. You could even take this now and say, okay, if we look at, again, the idea that each pixel or each square on our grid is 30 pixels long, what is the surface area of what is the area of one of these squares? Okay, well, if one is this area, what is the surface area of our whole cube? So then taking it that next step further, but they can actually see it drawn out on here on the grid. And that's why I really, really like having the grid background in this kind of a case, because of that kind of capability of it. It just gets tricky when you're trying to start off knowing where your coordinates should be to start off. That just takes a little bit of
and just take a look. So hopefully everybody's been able to add in here. I'm going to see, has anyone been able to do the triangular prism, or did anyone try anything different? So this is a teacher, you can go in and take a look. I can look at this one. I think as a teacher too, when you are using platforms like this, you probably want to encourage them to have some sort of title instructions. Sometimes that becomes very helpful, but a title can sometimes be helpful there. And then I'm going to see inside, and I'm going to try it out. So I'll press the space bar. Yeah, so this is a great way that you can, this is also one way you can do a bit of an assessment to see whether students now, this is where groups might be helpful, where you have a group of students maybe working together. Going through each one might be a challenge, or you may just want to check out, you know, a few here and there, but you can see whether they were able to successfully create the net here. And also you can see whether did they do it the same way as, in this case, it looks like it's very similar to the way that Laura created it, or did they, as Andrew did it, tried something different? So just going back in and taking a look at the studio, I'll just check one more time to see if we have it, but, you know, encourage you to try different ways as to demonstrate it, reflect on it, as Laura said, and talk with it as a group, and then pose them with different challenges is a great way for them to extend upon the learning that they have done. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the presentation in here and just go through some of the slides to get to where we were. So the last part of the session is the rose, the thorn, and bud. And again, all of this material, all these slides are available to you, so you can look over them more in depthly. And if to end the session, if you want to mention a rose, a thorn, a bud, you can mention that in this Padlet here. And it is the same Padlet. So I'm going to post that into the chat box. As we mentioned, you will be given a book, and the one that will be coming is Coding for Young Mathematicians. So in this book, developed by the Math Knowledge Network, it focuses on grade 1 and 8. It uses Scratch and Python, developed by George and Lisa here, and what I love about this book is it doesn't just talk about, like, there's so many different examples here of both Scratch and Python. So really, really allowing students that are pushing Scratch to although I would say that Scratch has a very high level of functionality. But if you want to move into syntax, there is some Python coding here as well. And then at the end, they talks about some pedagogical principles as well, and the coding movement, which we talked about as well in this session. So lots of different examples here. I'll talk about really some interesting ones about motion geometry and extend. And what I really like about this book is the ability he has to extend into deeper concepts and help students to sort of link the concepts they're learning to really bigger concepts. And I think that that's a nice thing for them to be able to appreciate as they're learning the math. And in each lesson, there's a link to the curriculum connections here. And as you can see, there's never just one curriculum connections, there's many. So that will be the book. There was an email that was sent out by, I believe it was Jennifer Robb. I'm going to go back into the presentation here, sorry, and just look at the Padlet. So if you want to link to the Padlet here, did I put the link in? I'm not sure I did. Hold on. I'm just going to put the link back in for people to go in and click.
Here, I got it, Margie.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Laura.
No problem.
And as Jeanette said, we just need your school district or organizational emails rather than Gmails or personal emails to send out the material to. So I believe all those details were sent to you from, I believe that you would have received it either from Jennifer Robb or from the UIT STEAM 3D email. So if you could respond to that, if you haven't, if you have any issues, just send a response back, and we'll just make sure that that information gets to you, and so that you can get the book as well, because there's lots and lots of material there, more in depth, and on not just coding with Scratch, for example, but also coding with Python. So are there any questions that you want to pose? You can ask it now. You can jump on the mic or any comments. Other than that, if you could click on the Padlet and either identify a rose, a thud, a bud, or something further that you have some questions about, because we do offer more sessions. We are offering sessions for students as well. So if you have a class and are thinking about doing some online learning with coding and math, we did one last week. We have another one coming up this week. So there are more options there for us to be involved. And you can just send an email to our UOIT STEAM3D at Gmail. My ad's on. There we go. Thanks, Jeanette. My ad sign on my other keyboard, it always goes to French. So all of a sudden I lose it. Thanks. But if there's any questions that anybody has, the last couple minutes here, you can jump on the mic or you can post them inside. I'm going to go to this Padlet and see if anybody has responded. I guess the question I have is, was anybody able to do the triangular prism?
I started working on it.
Awesome. Awesome. So yes, we have, so I guess there's one of the teachers here for our grade 5 and 6 students on Thursday. Yep, still working on the triangular prism, and that's great. So thank you to all those that came. Thank you to Jeanette for coming. Thank you, Laura, for the presentation. And thank you to all the participants that actually came and participated in this.
Yeah, thank you too, Margie. But I hope that we have given you guys some insight into math and online learning with Scratch. Like Margie said, the book is a really great resource for you. So moving forward, definitely take a look at it once you get it, because it is it has a ton of information, some really good ideas that can work as kind of jumping off points for you. Laura just said I'd be interested to see people's triangular prisms. So if you want to share that with us, feel free. I'm working on mine right now. So
Great. I'm keeping it up. So if anybody has here, if they just want to title it maybe with like triangle or something, I'll know which one it is. But right now I see a lot of, I think there's a lot of cubes. So I'm going to go into some of these and take a look.
And just as you do that, I want to say thank you to both of you, Laura and Margie, for leading the session today. It was excellent as always. And I hope we'll see some of our participants again in future sessions.
And then even with something like this, you know, for students that they could then actually take the same concept that they're doing in Scratch, and they could actually recreate it even on pieces of paper, and you could ask them to cut it out and then actually create the cube. So where they actually have a tangible item that they can touch. So they can take the concepts that they learned from here and then do something hands-on. So that's an option too. The other option is you can also go into three-dimensional environments like Tinkercad and create the cube as well. So lots of different options there to extend.
all right, I've got a triangle made.
Oh, great. I'm going to take a look.
Not a prism yet, but
Okay. So I'm going to click on the link then, I guess. Let me go in here. There we go. Oh, there we go. Created a triangle.
And I actually took a page out of Andrew's book and defined a triangle block.
Awesome. And so here you can talk about how they could extend this and combine it with what they created, or ask them how they could take this triangle, now make a triangular prism with some of the ideas that they learned from creating the cube. They also could have done a rectangular prism as well. So various different options there. Thanks, Laura. So we got 3 more minutes left. So if you we'll stay on for 3 more minutes to take a look if anybody has any more. But please don't forget to add to that Padlet if you can. It does also help us in terms of feedback and ways to improve. This was our first math and coding session using George's material, and I think it's a great idea because he has these books to supplement what you can learn here. Lots more details there. So. I'm just going to go back into Scratch in the last minute, see if I find anybody in there. And that's the other thing. If you do and you want to share it, what I've noticed sometimes when you do have teacher accounts is sometimes, you never know, there can be sometimes issues like I had at the beginning. I hadn't allowed anyone to add projects except for, I think, my students. So if little things like that are happening and there's an issue, the other option is you could do what Laura did, which is send the link. So then you can click on it. Or what you can do is you could ask them to share their screen. So I've done that as well. So Andrew says he's got a triangular prism. So if it's not in the studio, did you want to share it on your screen, or did you want to copy and paste the link? What would you like to do, Andrew? Oh, I see something here. A cube net. I think this might be it, Andrew. So, and Scratch gets a little slow. So I'm just going to take a look at it before I go inside. Yeah, I can see. And okay, that might not be the one that was done. Let me go back. Oh, use the space key. My apologies. So I'm going to use the space key and I'm going to start again. Let's see. There we go. There we go. I think we're just missing maybe one more here. But very, very good. I would say that this would be an excellent way. Then I would just take a look and see. It could be that I didn't press the space bar correctly, but that's where actually when you do look, sorry, I have a step away. We have them installing TV. Yes, thank you very much. It's actually 3 o'clock, so this is the end of the session. Thank you all for providing, and we really appreciate it, and hopefully you can add something to our Padlet. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.